All right, Peter, thank you for joining the podcast today, and it's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Ben.
So I always like to start with, what was your background? We've worked together for many years, but let's rewind it a little bit, talk a little bit about how you got into the tech market. Then we'll talk a little bit about what you're currently doing. But I find that, your background and your experience really sets the perspective that you have and essentially the path that you go down in your career. Sometimes it's a little windy. Sometimes it's a little lucky or not unlucky. But let's start with where it started, and then we'll get into what you're up to now.
That's pretty spot on, Ben. I think your past informs your present and your future. And with regard to AI and what I'm focused on now, I think my past absolutely does. So my career over the last 30 years actually had two distinct eras. The first era was digital transformation. So I actually dropped out of college in the summer of '95 to go and start working in this new business that was emerging with the internet, right? And at the time, if you recall, for those of us who are old enough to remember that, this was still emerging, right? I think the web, even in '97, everyone was really excited about it, but it was not necessarily seen as a real thing just yet. And so I spent the first 15 years of my career as an agency, digital agency and consulting executive, doing what we now describe as digital transformation, right? Back then we weren't thinking about it that way, but unlocking new channels and, adding new capabilities. And I'm really proud of that time. I worked on over 100 different brands in 15 years and got to do some really interesting things. We built one of the very first online account access systems for a bank, right? For being able to access your information there, going to a mainframe for the first time. I got to work on large consumer brand things. I worked on the iTunes brand launch and, got to work on the Azure brand launch and other things. And that was a distinct and really enjoyable part of my career. And in the late 2000s, I basically was working as an executive at a very large independent digital agency called Razorfish at the time. We were acquired by Microsoft. We were acquired for our ad tech. And went through the transition, but sort of at the end when the consulting business was sold back out of Microsoft, I decided to make a change, and that transitioned me into the second phase of my career. So I spent the last 15 years as an executive in software companies. As somebody who was a heavy user for all of that time, it was a natural transition for me to now be on the software side, creating a lot of those same tools. And I've had a great journey. I got to do some really interesting things. I'm a longtime open source guy, so spent time building up a company called Acquia, which was the Drupal open source project, which I was a huge user of. It was, at the time, it was 4 or 5% of the internet ran on Drupal. Was at Nginx, which now powers, I think, almost 95% of the web runs through their web server load balancers. Really, really phenomenal journey. But starting, probably about 10 years ago, 10 years ago now, I really got focused on AI, pre-LLM even, when we were looking at NLP, and we were looking at image processing, the really advanced predictive models that we were doing with deep learning. And it was really apparent to me that was the future, right? The if this, then that, deterministic software, we had such severe limitations. And when you looked at an algorithmic-based experience, when you looked at what could be done with that as your processor instead of simple software, it was really apparent to me that something interesting was happening. So I started putting my own money as an investor and as an angel, and then also doing advisory work for these early stage AI companies, including some things that were probably a little too early, but then ended up now being absorbed into other companies. I worked with a team that was trying to build the very first AI SDR back in 2017, 2018, when the LLMs first emerged. That's now part of Genesis, right? And that's a really interesting group doing great work. But I finally made the transition now 4 years ago officially into AI as my day job, right? Originally at Tab9, which is the creator of the AI code assistant category. I did that specifically because the AI for software development is probably 3 to 5 years ahead of AI application in every job function. And it was really clear you could learn a lot doing that. And now for the last 6.5 months, I've been CEO at EverWorker, which is a full agentic AI platform.
Okay. All right. So looking forward to digging into that and digging into EverWorker. Your first experience was in, I'm going to call it consulting, right? And I think that sets your perspective on how do you work in between the vendor and the end user, right? And so you get to play both those roles. And that's one thing I love about GigaOm is I get to kind of sit in the middle and kind of watch how it all works together and where the opportunities are and where we're doing things wrong. But you got to be hands-on, right, and actually do things, which is cool. I liked your comment about the kind of if this, then that, the IFTTTT or whatever. We used to talk a lot about that around IoT and all that stuff back in 2012, 2015. Your point on kind of digital transformation, I was like just literally putting the physical things on a digital piece of paper at the very table stakes way, and then essentially incrementally, kind of moving it up. And I think if you think about like digital transformation to cloud to data, now AI, the AI thing is actually driving all of this cloud data stuff, right? And I think as you got involved probably 8 to 10 years ago, you probably saw that happening, right? You saw that the investors had a very big appetite for AI. There was some real use cases, but it was just so expensive to deploy. It's kind of like how expensive it used to be to deploy a server and run a website, right? Like, then cloud came around and I can just spin it up now and I can start a business. And so we're seeing the same thing now in AI. So you live through the opportunity and the chaos of the first, I'm going to call it internet boom. What do you see that's different this time? Both kind of putting your consulting hat on, thinking about the vendors, the investors you talk to, the end users. Like, I don't think people understood what the opportunity was back then. I think everyone has a much bigger opportunity that they're trying to chase after here because we've gone through these different iterations, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's the same. And then you're right, there are a number of things that are radically different. And I think the similarities, it's important to draw the similarities, right? AI today feels to me very much like the web in 97, right? Where everyone knows it's important, but there's still skepticism. Everyone realizes and recognizes that it's transformational. This is not just some new widget, right? This is really transformational. But at the same time, doesn't really know where they're going, right? And the number of people who claim they are AI experts versus the number of people who truly are AI experts is not the same thing, right? It is absolutely not the same thing. And then I feel very much for the average business executive and trying to absorb this, and that is very similar to the late 90s. I spent my time as a consultant advising the C-suite on what this technology meant. Right, what it meant to their business. And that's why I'm loving what I'm doing right now, because it's been a reset back to that. If you look at where we landed with digital transformation, sort of post 2015, which is where I feel like we finally reached almost critical mass. 2020 was the final end of it, but 2015 is probably critical mass. Everybody knew what they were doing. We understood the value of the technology. We understood all of that. And we were just kind of iteratively improving, right? New products were coming out, new ways of working were coming out, but we had reached a level of maturity. Now we're right back to day one on those things. But what's different this time, I think there are a few things that are different about it this time. And the first one actually is its impact. It is not digital transformation again, right? Because digital transformation was digitizing distribution, right? One component of how we operated. My opinion is AI, particularly even just the LLMs as they exist today, this is like the invention of the steam engine when we have been handcrafting things, right? I do believe the impact of LLMs on knowledge work is going to be that dramatic. We've been digging with shovels and now we have engines to do it. And so that is going to have it's going to have an order of magnitude bigger impact on business than anything we saw in digital transformation. The other thing that's different about it is it's moving a lot faster because of what you said with VCs and because of the amount of money that's gone into it. I think everyone who missed out in the .com boom and the ultimate digital transformation that created so much wealth, they're not going to do that twice. They're not going to miss it twice. And I think that's true, not just for investors and for technologists, but even in the business. Like, I'm seeing early adopters in what in the past would have been late adopter industries, because they're looking at AI and saying, we're not going to let this pass us by again. And so my sense of this is that the transformation of AI is probably going to be 10x what we saw with digital transformation, but in half the time. And so that, I think, it's creating a lot of fear and uncertainty and just tension for people that we didn't see with digital transformation because we had time to absorb it, right? We had more time to absorb it. And I think that's putting more pressure on us as executives to figure out how to separate myth from reality, and to try to actually be the stillness in the storm around what the path forward really is, and to be true leaders in guiding the direction of this.
Yeah, you said a lot there. I want to unpack a little bit of it, but before we get to that, and then we'll talk about AI. You've been a part of Nginx, like you said, a ton of developers using it, a lot of websites using it. You talked, your MemSQL, which turned into Single Store. You were at Cockroach. Those are things that just technologists can use, right? And I think that's kind of where you're going with this, right? Is that, when you talk to executives and you talk to customers, this is about the everybody or the EverWorker or whatever, however you came up with that. Maybe talk about that. But anyone can go on to ChatGPT and use it. Anyone can start to do very, minor things like, hey, build this slide deck or whatever. And I think when people start to play around with it and see that opportunity, I haven't seen anything else like that in my career or my life, where it's actually enabled the everybody, right? I think in the tech industry, we talk about it. We want it to happen. It's a vision, but it doesn't always get there. It requires a technologist to build something. So, Nginx and Single Store and Cockroach, they at some point you run into, hey, like, there's only a certain amount of companies that want to engage in this and they want to try it out, or it's the developer and we always want 50 million of them or whatever, right? So there was a technology called AutoML that we were really excited about a couple of years ago, and one of my analysts said, hey, this is the thing that actually can make people see the value of AI and see the value of analytics and all that. It ended up kind of falling on its face. But this reminds me a lot about that. Like, there's been kind of opportunities along the path here to get people to engage, and this just opens up the floodgate, right? And I think people, like, I played golf with my cousin like 2 weeks ago, and we were playing with his friend who is a contractor, right? And he's using it, and he's like, I'm saving 4 hours a day just throwing my data in there and getting what I need out of it, right? Like, he's getting half of his day back, and he's not like a technologist, right? And that's great. So anyways, I digress. Let's talk a little bit about the EverWorker.
That's not a digression. I don't think that's a digression. I actually think you're grabbing onto something that is a fundamental component of what's happening with AI right now that not enough people, I think, are talking about, which is, most of the technology innovation we've had over the last 30 years was started in the hands of the math and physics majors, started in the hands of the nerds. And we figured it out, and then we brought it to the rest of the world. But I would argue the ChatGPT moment actually forced it the other way, right? Because we've been working with ML and AI for a really long time now. And I was always amazed that there was not more adoption. I was amazed. And I was amazed that as technology professionals, we weren't doing more with algorithms instead of building simple logic-based applications. I was floored that more people weren't doing that. I did it as a product developer, right? One of the products we built at Acquia was a ML-based targeting engine for personalization in your digital experiences. And at the time when we were doing this, people thought we were crazy for using multi-arm bandit and all these other advanced ML techniques. But I was like, why would you just guess? Why would you do an A/B test? Why don't just get to the answer? And what happened, I think, with ChatGPT was, now the programming language is not Java or JavaScript or PHP. Now the programming language is the English language. It's English. And now the processor isn't something that you have to write code against and send it to a backend somewhere. Now it's just the LLM. And now what I see when I talk to customers is not IT driving the conversation anymore. In fact, IT might be the drag on most of these conversations because they're trying to take the old ways of building these things and doing these things. It's all coming from the business. My customers at EverWorker, almost every time is C-suite. Truly almost every time. And it's a top-down mandate because they're understanding AI is going to transform EBITDA. AI is going to transform revenue per head, right? AI is going to fundamentally change the dynamics of my business so I can be more competitive. And so they're telling their IT organization to adopt it as opposed to the other way around. It's the first time we've seen this in my entire career.
Yeah, Yeah, I would also argue like we might be more successful this time around with this whole adoption because I'm going to call the CEO is now the servant leader. I practice servant leadership maybe too much sometimes. Like, as an entrepreneur, I have to kind of help move things along if it's not moving at the pace, or I want to help support a customer or whatever. Before it was like, hey, like let's go do this cloud thing. Let's be a cloud company. Let's be a data company, whatever. And they're like, just go figure out IT and business, go figure out. And now like the CEOs are saying, show me how it works. I know how to engage it. Like they're actually becoming a part of the driver of their conversation, and they're not leaving the room, right? They're not saying, okay, team, go kind of be a leadership team and go figure it out. And this $100 million project may work or may not, and go play your game here. So now it's like the CEOs and the board saying, what have you done? What are you doing? I think it on the flip side for IT, it gives them the opportunity to mature and transform like they've always wanted to, and it gives them the more opportunity. But I think it's on the vendors and everyone in the ecosystem to help them do that. And also it's on the vendors to not just sell IT on IT, right?
Agreed.
Like, don't just go and sell, hey, like here's your technical solution for your technical problem. Here's your governance thing. Here's your security thing. This will help you kind of control it and manage it. Like that's important. But like, IT, you need to be a strategist, right? And you need to find someone in the business, maybe the CEO, who you can partner with. And guess what? Now you're a part of the C-suite conversation, and you can almost catapult your career in a matter of weeks or months, which you would have had to wait your entire career and maybe never have gotten there. So anyone who has those aspirations, I am more than happy to talk to you and help you through that journey, because it's a big one. Or, hey, like just partner with someone in the business that actually cares and wants to push it, right? Because I think there's plenty of people right now that want to do it at every level of the organization. So 100%, Peter, I agree. It's crazy. I was talking to another founder the other day, and he was talking about how like he sees the crazy look in his employees, his partners, and his customers' eyes. So tell me about some of the crazy customers you're talking to. Tell me about your craziness. Tell me about like what's going on in your world, and what are the real business outcomes here, right?
Yeah. The business outcomes are already clear and specific and measurable, which is really powerful there. And even outside of what we've seen at EverWorker and the customers we've worked with, there's actually started to be some early analysis on this. And there was a great study that was done by a boutique analyst firm who was looking at the early adopters. So people who they would consider AI first. So they were choosing to start with AI before a human on a process, versus those who are AI augmented. So those who are heavily embracing AI in their general day-to-day tasks, versus then the rest of the people in their category. And what was remarkable about that data was over 70 companies that were analyzed. They saw a clear pattern emerging that basically on almost every efficiency or effectiveness measure, the AI first and the AI augmented companies were dramatically ahead. So like revenue per head for AI first companies, already 2 to 6 times the size of the similar players in their category.
Just to be clear, you're talking about companies who started with like they were a brand new company starting with like, we're just going to use AI to augment people, but not have to hire as many people. Is that
not necessarily new companies, actually, because in that mix were people who said, okay, we're willing to make some radical changes in what we're doing. I mean, the CEO of Klarna, great examples. The CEO of Klarna went public now, I think a month or so ago, and talked about their financials. He didn't say this in his speaking, but I think everybody knew it was true. Their financials did not work to IPO, right? Their cost basis and their burn rate and all these other things just wasn't working. So the old way of doing things is like, okay, well, let's do more with less. Let's fire people and let's do all those things. And then you kill your growth rate and you kill your competitiveness when you do that. Mm-hmm. So he did layoffs. I don't remember the exact number anymore, but I think it was somewhere on the order of 10 to 20%. Not huge. But he made a focus on being AI first in all of their behaviors, and he doubled his revenue per head across his business within 12 months. That's unheard of. Like when you only trim that much and then you continue to grow and continue to perform at that level, that's the first signs we're seeing here that you can do this. There's other very public case studies around this already with, people moving their their EBITDA 20 points, 30 points, right, within 12 to 18 months by embracing these technologies. And what's really interesting about this, Ben, you know who benefits the most from it? The boring billion-dollar businesses that have huge human labor forces and struggle with margin. Those are the people who are benefiting most from it, which is really interesting because I feel like for my career, your career as well, usually early adopter technology was an inverted bell curve. It was the startups, it was the new companies, it was the real like heavy innovators who were really small and nimble, and then the leaders in their category that basically had capital to burn. They were already industry leaders. They could take risks. That was how new technology got adopted. What I'm seeing with AI adoption is a true bell curve again, right? Where we're actually seeing the mid-market being the ones that are actually the ones who are willing to do it, right? The larger organizations, of course, are doing this as well, but I think they're stuck in like IT analysis paralysis, and they're trying to do everything with like crazy governance, and they're trying to boil the ocean when they build these agentic workflows, and they're trying to solve for huge problems, and they're missing the near-term value. They're totally missing the near-term value.
Yeah, let's talk about that, right? Because I think that with a lot of new technologies, it's about trying it, getting it going, building trust, and for a long time, that's only been accessible to very large companies. I think recently, I'm going to say over the last 10 years, probably because of cloud and everything else, it's kind of come downstream to the market.
Yeah.
And we work with a lot of mid-market, a lot of SMBs who don't have the talent, resources, skills of IT, right? All of these things that it's just inaccessible, and they could be $1 billion company, right? But they're running on razor thin margins because they're a manufacturing company, right? So, and there's more of those companies than there are Fortune 5,000 companies, right?
Yeah.
And there's more people who want to start those companies than who want to start a Fortune 5,000 company, right? And so, maybe your next side hustle should be a manufacturing company instead of being a social influencer, Peter. Maybe we could start a podcast on that. But what are you seeing with the mid-market? What are you seeing with SMBs? For the just normal human being out there, like that construction guy I mentioned. What are you seeing that's kind of like simple, basic stuff, medium, interesting stuff, and then advanced things that they can actually do that they don't need to have a huge IT team or have a lot of resources and talent, etc.
Yeah. Look, I think necessity is the mother of invention. And I think actually the fact that you can't hire AI engineers, the fact that you can't hire data engineers, the fact that Meta and Apple and Google and Microsoft or JPMC and the big companies are all hoovering these people up, in some ways is a good thing, because what it's forced the mid-market to do is actually be creative, right? And figure out other ways around it. And what we're seeing is a logical journey for those organizations as they adopt AI. Our earliest customers typically started by just embracing things like ChatGPT, peppered across the organization, right? And some of it was encouraged, some of it was just natural. Like you said, your construction contact, I hear more of that than you might realize, right? I was on with a CEO of a, I'd call it a mid-market, financial firm this morning. And he was already talking about all the things he wanted AI to do because he had been exposed enough to this as an end user. He was starting to get it. So those assistive use cases add tremendous value. So, we encourage it, right? You want the assistance, you want those things. Now be careful about exfiltrating proprietary company data, because I don't think any of us are really truly comfortable with the terms of service from all these providers just yet. But, I think being able to at least get started with those things is good. The second wave of adoption we see is people buying what we call tactical agents. Here is an AI agent that does a specific function. It does a specific task, right? It does a specific thing. And those are really valuable, right? They are something that get super short time to value. You immediately see benefit, and you can start offloading common and repeatable tasks, right? That's the first exposure I think most people are getting to agentic AI, and they're seeing the value. They're seeing, instead of the 4 hours of time saved because that person was going and like copying and pasting data in and doing that, they're probably spending, they're probably saving 4 hours, but they're spending an hour to do it, right? The first wave of these tactical agents, well, now it just runs. It just does what it's supposed to do when you ask it to do it, right? The evolution of the species then is into, okay, now You don't want to use the same thing that everybody's using because now you have no competitive differentiation. Now, if you and all your competitors are doing things exactly the same way, how do you separate? And then actually in these boring billion-dollar businesses, they actually have unique processes and unique capabilities and unique approaches to things that have been their competitive advantage. They're just trying to accelerate it. They want to increase their capacity, or they want to increase their capability or increase their velocity. And that's where we come in, right? And we're seeing now, like for us, we're very focused on what we consider the long tail of use cases inside of a large organization, right? The stuff that is bespoke and unique to you, but is the value for your business. And what we've seen in this space, which we didn't see in the web for probably 5 to 10 years, probably closer to 10 years, is no code leading the charge, right? We're one of a handful of folks who are solving this problem without requiring software engineering, right? There's a super complicated stack to build agentic AI, right? You've got to think about it. And it's all open source, thankfully. There's 1,000 ways of building AI applications and AI agents because there's a lot of innovation that's already happened, which is great. That's really, really phenomenal. But it's still targeted at the AI engineer, or at the very least, some very savvy software engineers. And that's too much, man. Like if you're a business person and you're just trying to like automate that long tail of operational use cases, you can't wait for an AI engineer to go and get to you. I talked to a CTO at one of the large banks, and she's accountable for a line of business, but they have to access those resources from the rest of the CIO's organization. And when she brought up the operational use cases to that CIO, he said, yeah, we'll do those. I'll talk to you in 6 to 9 months. That's when we'll get to them, which actually effectively, as we all know, in IT means it'll never get done because something else will end up on the top of the roadmap before they even get to it. So the no-code platforms really are the answer, I think. Like we have a fully integrated stack. It has all the RAG infrastructure, it has all the model connections, has all the API connections. Because what we think the business needs right now is they need the equivalent of a CMS. They need the equivalent of Shopify, instead of hard coding your storefront. And the technology is straightforward enough that we can do this, right? We have an agent that even builds agents. You just interact with it, tell it what you're trying to do, gives you examples of how the workflow runs, and then it just constructs the workflow for you and says, okay, is this what you wanted? Right? And then you can tweak it and tune it. And that's where the technology has gone. It's already there, which is remarkable, if you ask me.
Okay, I got a couple questions. First one is, what do you tell businesses who have heard this story before that they can automate their processes? I'd say the latest one would be RPA, right? But you could go back 20 years and name 4 other technologies about business process automation, right? So why did RPA not live up to its vision? And what is different about it this time? And then I'll come back to your point about the business and IT. I think that's a really important discussion.
Well, agentic AI, I think, takes a number of forms. Like we think about it as actually 3 different. There are 3 different applications, right? There's workflow-based use cases. There's more sort of universal conversational use cases where you actually want to allow more autonomy. And then there's more assistive use cases where it's a peer and partner that you interact with, more of the ChatGPT style approach. RPA was an amazing first effort at those sort of workflow-based automations. And the way I always talk to my customers about it is, look, if you want a process executed exactly the same way, exactly the same time, with exactly the same outcome. Like we work with a pharmaceutical company right now, and they're trying to automate certain pieces in their manufacturing process. And that, according to the FDA, cannot be different, right? They actually audit the automation to make sure that it happens exactly the same 100 or 1,000 times. So you can't deviate. So these sort of open-ended agents where you just give very complex prompts and let them make decisions would not work, right? You have to do these more workflow-based tools. And so the difference between the agentic approach and the RPA approach is the RPA approach was always really fragile, right? Because it was deterministic software, because it was more of the if this, then that decision trees. If anything deviated, right, you're going extracting a specific piece of information in an explicit way from a specific format. If that format changes, if the data doesn't look right, if anything is different, the whole thing breaks, right? And there were workarounds. I don't want to completely diminish what was possible in RPA. I mean, there were always workarounds, but it never really delivered against the promise we all wanted. It never really did, right? But when you're interacting with an LLM, it's different. You don't have to actually write, find this string and do it in this way, and then this is how you process it using math. you can give it instructions, right? You can say, read this document. In this document, you are looking for the following information, and it will get it. It will get it. And if it takes 10 different formats, it does it. I mean, we work with a wealth management firm. It's one of our early design partners. They're doing really remarkable things with AI. They actually have replaced the quarterly financial analysis, sort of reading the reports and extracting the right information that was done by Stanford grads, the sort of new grad work. We have an AI worker that pays attention to web portals. It listens to an email inbox. It actually goes and can take other things that are sent directly to it. And then, typically this is for family offices, like large scale wealth management. So 40, 50 assets in a quarter are analyzed, right? VC, PE, equities, bonds, other sort of unique and sort of derivative products. Mm-hmm. And it literally reads every quarterly report and it looks for the same information. What does it do with that information? Writes it to a system of record, sends an email summary of what actually it read, and sort of an executive summary of what it saw in the report, consolidates a bunch of that information for further analysis in the future. But it's doing it based on, like, go read this, look for this. Then once you've got that, write these key data points to this other system. Mm. And if the report changes, if the format changes, nothing breaks, which happens, right? I mean, every quarter they're probably doing little tweaks and changing the table format and doing new things. That's the difference, right? That is the difference. If you can delegate a task to a human, if you can offshore a role or an assignment, then you can offshore it to a GPU. Then you can turn that into an AI worker. And we've seen it literally every customer we've ever tried this with. If it was that clear of a role, it was that, clearly documented, we've been able to build it in hours to days.
Okay, I got a lot of questions, but we only got 10 or 15 minutes. So I want to talk about that because I think you mentioned something last time we talked before this time we met today, which was there's all of these jobs that we need to fill, and there's all these jobs that are repetitive but need some type of creativity to do. And so, I think that was pretty interesting to hear, because that is where a lot of companies struggle now, right? Like you can't hire enough people to do a certain task. And also there's some tasks that people don't want to do. Like they don't want to spend their days doing what you just said, right?
No.
And it requires so many different people in the organization to participate in that. There's so much time wasted that you are using your own CPUs internally in your own brain, where you could be using it for something else. Like, well, what should we do about this information, right? Like, what other information should we be bringing in to help inform us, right? Who else we should be partnering with to be thinking about this differently, right? Like that's where the human brain and that skill set probably in that business should be. So, talk a little bit about like the jobs that aren't filled and how we kind of fill those, and then talk a little bit about like, what we're going to see with the workforce. Because I think a lot of people are saying a lot of things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hyperbole. There's a lot of reality out there. It's somewhere in between. Yeah. And every business is different, right? Software development is going to be different than manufacturing, et cetera. Yeah. But, I'm probably can't tell with my hairline here, but I'm 41. When I got into the workforce, it was just people. Like you just needed people, right? We're getting to the point where it's like people plus machine. We've been talking about that for a long time. Are we going to get to a point in our lifetime, Peter, right, where, again, it's going to take some time, but like, are we getting to a point where, you may not need as many people, right? And that's okay. We can find new things for them to do. There's plenty of things to do, right? Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, here's my view on this. I think people are really afraid of AI job loss, right? And I think there is a very valid concern there around AI disruption of current jobs, right? Mark my words. I think business process outsourcing evaporates in the next 5 to 10 years. Evaporates. Like I don't think it's needed anymore. If you can offshore to a team in the Philippines, which has high churn rates and low training, you can offshore to a GPU. That will go away. Some of my earliest customers, their first use cases were creating AI workers to replace offshore teams that were doing low value work that was just a drain. They needed free cash flow, so they wanted to shut it down. But that doesn't mean that then the human goes out of the loop, because the capability the LLM gives us is amazing, right? We can do a high volume of processing of information, including analysis and synthesis and generation and all these other things really, really quickly. But it's not creative. It's not, right? And I think even the things that we think are creativity, let's not forget what the LLMs are. They're pattern matchers. They're a really, really highly advanced predictive model, as effectively what they are. So it's very good at repeating a pattern it's seen in the past. But I will tell you, true creativity and true strategic thinking breaks patterns. I've seen it consistently. For those of us who are old enough to remember this, we got the iPhone before we even realized we needed it, right? Then this has happened in every major breakthrough we've had, right? And so the role of the human doesn't change. But more so than that, what we're not talking about is actually in the Western world, birth rates are in decline. And we're actually, the truth about the massive inflation we saw in the last 5 years actually had less to do with COVID and more to do with demographics. Boomers are retiring at a really high rate. This is the largest generation in American history, and they're not being replaced. Zoomers are not making it up. They're not making up the numbers. So as boomers started retiring, actually all the way going back to 2018, it created a vacuum. And it pulled all of the more skilled workers up into leadership positions, and all these repeatable jobs, all these entry-level jobs, you can't hire them. Talk to me, if you are one of these boring billion-dollar businesses and you're trying to hire people to do contact center, like high value, high touch contact center work, you can't get them. You literally can't get them. And so
you can't get them in that location for the call center, or you just can't get them.
Yeah. Well, you can't get them in general, I think, at an affordable rate. I think this is why we've ended up offshore on some of these things. But many times we're then not getting the same experience we wanted to give our customers. And so, and I think the demographics, at least across the Western world, don't lie. Like we are going to be smaller as a human population over the next 40 years. We will. And go and do the research on your own. There's plenty of documentation about this. But what happens typically when populations shrink is GDP shrinks, usually dramatically, right?
Yep.
Look at Japan. Japan was in stagflation for the last 20 years, and it's hurt them a lot. And I think AI is emerging at just the right time where AI workers can close the gap, right? And we as humans can become managers and leaders and be strategic and creative and visionary. And a lot of those sort of the things that ate up our day that didn't add value, the sweat equity side of the job can be pushed off to the AI worker, which is incredibly fast and incredibly efficient and incredibly predictable in what it does. And so I'm already seeing it in the early adopters, right? I mean, even my own team, I've got a really thin marketing team. I've got a head of product marketing, and he's, with AI workers is probably doing the work of, 3 content marketers and 2 incremental product marketers on top of what he does, because he's got it all wired. Right. But he's still the one building the messaging strategy. He's the one still building the personas we care about and talking about differentiators and the true strategic thinking that goes into the work. Right. But, spending 3 days looking at competitors to do competitive intelligence, guess what? The AI can do that. It does it super well, super fast. And actually just paying attention to the competitors' websites and sending you updates on a daily basis.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should do a podcast on GDP and AI, but we'll do that. We'll do that on a Sunday morning for some news. The other question I have is, let's talk a little bit about the business and technology again, because what you're talking about, I'm just gonna be honest, sounds like magic. Sounds amazing, right? The business wants to do something. They've had the experience with ChatGPT. You have IT, who's like, we got to make sure it's governed, and all the things you said those federally regulated companies are doing.
Yeah.
How do we govern this thing? Is that something that you're building into your platform? Is it some ecosystem we build and manage it? Like, how are we going to do this? Because you have all these different platforms out there. You have cloud companies, like all these data companies are now becoming data governance companies. All these cloud companies are now becoming data governance companies. So how are we going to govern this and manage this, as we kind of, continue the evolution of this?
Look, governance is one of those things that I think we need to be more specific about what we mean. And I would argue when I hear governance brought up many times, it feels like in some organizations it's being brought up as a reason to say no, as opposed to truly protecting the organization, right? Or truly protecting what needs to be done. And a lot of the controls that we needed around governance for AI are already in place, like data governance and permissions, right, are things that we already have those guardrails. So as long as we stay within the guardrails that already exist, then we're in good shape. Like most of the AI workers we create, they use the existing APIs, they use existing logins, and then you have a choice of, do you want the AI to have, it's just like role-based access controls. Do you want the AI to have the same visibility as an individual worker, which is a good use case, for example, on those sort of personal assistant use cases? Do you want it to have a broader remit of understanding? Like we do for these universal workers we have that do things like sales enablement or product marketing. They have a scope of work, and they're allowed certain systems. Or in the workflow-based systems, it's only very specific data it ever sees. It doesn't have full access to systems. It just gets fed specific information that's relevant to the task, right? And so we have a lot of those controls. I think then the data security side is a really important conversation, which is, where does all these systems reside? What is your terms of service with the LLM provider? What is your terms of service with an organization like ours? Like most of our customers privately deploy us, run on VPC or Kubernetes on premise, and actually increasingly we're doing most of our business actually outside of the United States right now. Those folks are really concerned about sovereign AI, right? They want locally deployed models. I'm working with organizations in Europe and in the Middle East right now that have their own private deployments of Llama or DeepSeek, and that's what they're using because they don't trust the American companies to not keep their data, right? And they're probably not wrong. I mean, I hate to say it, like forget what the terms of service say. Look at what happened with Facebook for a decade. They were exfiltrating your personal data and not telling you, right? And so, I think the profit motive is so high on some of these things that you do have to earn trust. And that leads me into the other side of it, which is then the behavior of AI. And the other governance there is really strict controls over its behavior, right? And what it's allowed to do. Those workflow-based UIs that we have, that's all about that. If you need to have strict control, then you put strict control over it. The more open-ended assistive use cases, like we have these things we call universal workers. And there tend to be more chat interaction-based workers. So they could be things like sales enablement. But when we do those, we strictly define what is the knowledge it has access to and the knowledge it should have to do its job. What are the instructions we're giving it, where you can set the guardrails in its behavior, including what LLM it works off of, and then what are the skills it's allowed to execute? Like, can it touch a system? Can it write an email? Can it generate a new document? Right? Can it write to a system on your behalf? And we actually put really strict controls around those things because the reality is the trust is only going to be built with knowledge and control, around these things, just like you would a human, though. I don't think the governance of AI really looks that different from how we actually manage our people. And if we have that mindset, then I think we can be really successful.
So you said that governance is kind of, there's the governance piece, there's the data security piece. What exactly is the challenge with creating that stack or that layer, right? Like, are you building it within your platform? Like you said, we've solved the data governance problem. Or are you integrating with other companies? Like, how are companies supposed to do this when IT does say, what about IT governance? Like, is it because many times it's just a checkbox and like, okay, keep going. Like we saw that with low code and some other things, because there is a structure that I think everyone understands, but like you usually have to go build this, like I'm going to say spaghetti reference architecture, right? Because you need the best of breed of this thing, the best of breed of this thing, the best of breed, and all of a sudden it becomes more expensive, it takes forever, and blah, blah, blah. So how are you thinking about kind of your stack and integrating with this ecosystem that is moving so fast and is probably breaking things? Because I know how Silicon Valley works. I'm part of it too. How can we kind of manage the chaos? And I know that was something that you talked about too, like the type of stack you guys have built. So I don't want to get too much in the technology piece, but tell us a little bit about how you kind of thought about building the layers of technology that
Yeah.
maybe some other companies haven't built yet or haven't thought about.
Look, we're trying to not do unnatural things. What we're trying to do, our mission is to be the fastest and most effective way to get you from 0 to 1 and from 1 to scale with AI. That's my mission.
Okay.
Right. My mission is to make it as easy as possible. And so when we first started building EverWorker, rather than say, okay, we're going to do some sort of unique way of governing it, or build new connectors like MCP and all these other things, we said, well, wait a minute, the organization already does these things. Like, I, as a user, have access to certain systems. I have permissions to those systems. Or I, as an application, have access to certain systems and I have certain permissions, and I'm allowed to do certain things. Mm-hmm. Why not just respect that? Why create something wholly new?
Right.
I actually feel like that's almost a solution looking for a problem. Mm-hmm. Right? When we can just leave it the hell alone and use the stuff that already exists. We've been working, we've had CISOs putting controls and structure in place for the last 20 years. Why invent something new? Mm-hmm. Right. So we respect the APIs. We respect role-based access control. We respect connectors to various systems. We either give it permission that matches the user or it matches a specific assignment. So you can fire the AI worker if you need to and just cut off their system access. Mm-hmm. Right. So you can do those things. And then on the UI side, we apply a great deal of visibility, right? So in these workflow-based AI workers, where you can actually see, like that financial services worker, by the way, has like 250 nodes in it in the workflow to do everything that it wants to do, because we're making discrete calls against LLMs for discrete things. So it's really visible and understandable, right? And that's important, because that's where your governance comes in. Is like, what is it doing? How is it doing it? Why is it doing it? Whereas if you just generally interact with something like ChatGPT, it's a black box. But it's no different than a person, right? Because a person also is like, I don't really know why I know that, but I know it. Like, people do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so we think visibility, transparency, control, these are the things we've already been focused on, as businesses for a very long time. So if we can respect those same processes and respect those same things, it's going to be the easiest way of doing it. Now, data governance, exfiltration of data to various systems. Once again, like, I think we need to respect the way we've always done these things and have those conversations about, is this information you would really give to a third party, right? Is this information you really would make accessible to everybody? I actually think in some ways, it's a little bit of a sidebar, but like what we've done with data warehousing has actually made it worse, right? Because now we're starting to munge data together in places where maybe it was useful for an analyst, but did you really want to put all of that accessible to everybody? Like, you probably didn't. And this is the nice thing about AI and the way we do these things. I don't need a data warehouse. I can talk directly to the 100 different sources, right? I can just talk directly in, pull in via vector what is the most relevant thing, and feed it to the LLM to process. Mm-hmm. So I don't even have to go and consolidate data anymore. I don't have to ETL data anymore. So, where the data doesn't even have to be in a database. I can go and read flat files, right? The LLM doesn't care if it's structured data or unstructured data. So I feel like the governance side can even be easier, because we're not creating risk by starting to aggregate data that maybe or maybe not should be accessed for various use cases.
Okay. All right. Well, this was fascinating, Peter. We'll have to do another one, because I'm sure you're learning and you're working with a lot of really interesting customers every day. But super excited for you. Like you said, you've been into this AI thing for 8 to 10 years. And you've seen a lot, and I think the world is your playground now. So congrats, and looking forward to seeing you guys succeed, and looking forward to seeing more companies who don't have the resources, talent, skills to be able to harness technology for business reasons. So it's super exciting time. Thanks for joining the podcast.
Yeah, appreciate it, Ben.